Now, this is to discuss the very source of second wave feminism. All you guys who go on about, the earlier waves were better, this is going to debunk that. Overlook no more Valerie Solanas, radical feminist who shot Andy Warhol. She made the daring arguments. See the language? They're daring arguments. They're not daring arguments. They're hate speech, just like the KKK. In the SCUM Manifesto, SCUM stands for cutting up men, okay? Her case for a world without men. That'd be like the white nationalists giving a case for a world without Jews. Remember that. But it was her attack on Warhol that came to define her life, of course, because Warhol was an important person and she was nobody. So there's the beauty, the nasty, hate-filled person. Now, by Bonnie Wortham. Okay, so I got a news story. She was an insane person, I would say. But what's this Bonnie Wortham's excuse? Okay. Overlooked in a series of obituaries about remarkable people whose deaths beginning in 1851 went unreported in the Times. This month, we're adding the stories of the important LGBTQ figures. So Andy Warhol was a gay man who was attacked and an attempted murder, and she did eventually cause his death. And they consider her a part of the LGBTQ. So all you gay and bi men, you're all right with this? Men are pathetic. On June 3rd, 1968, Valerie Solanas walked into Andy Warhol's studio, the factory, with a gun, with a plan to enact a vengeance. See, this is more the weasel language. That they're suggesting Warhol had done something to her. No, she was a mentally ill person who planned to enact violence against an innocent person. That's what actually happened. What happened next came to define her life and legacy. She fired at Warhol, nearly killing him. The incident reduced her to a tabloid headline, but also drew attention to her writing, which is still read in some gender studies courses today, see? So this is what I'm trying to get at. This is a part of gender studies. This is what the average woman thinks about the average guy. These gender studies. So when you go to university, look around at the women walking around the university. They're all right with this hate speech. So the best you can hope for, guys, is from the average girl is indifference. But, and it goes all the way down to Solanas, violence. Solanas was a radical feminist, though she would say she loathes most feminists. Because most feminists didn't get on board with her nihilistic viciousness. A pioneering queer theorist, at least according to some, and an author of the SCUM Manifesto, which she argued for the wholesale extermination of men. The manifesto, self-published in 1967, reads as satire. I don't think it reads as satire, though Solanas defended it as serious, of course, because it is serious. There's no satirical about it. Its opening line is at once absurd and called to arms for the coalition she was forming, the Society for Cutting Up Men. There you go, gay men. There you are, LGBT, all you gay men and bi men. The gender studies, they talk of this is very important. You guys have to get cut up. Life in this society being, at best, an utter bore. Oh, wow. And no aspect of society being at all relevant to women. There remains to civic-minded, responsible, thrill-seeking females. You see, that doesn't make much sense. You're responsible and civic-minded, but you're also thrill-seeking, only to overthrow the government. Wow, sounds like a libertarian. Eliminate the money system. So how do people trade with one another? Institute complete automation and destroy the male sex. Why complete automation? Because none of these girls want to have to deal with building society on their own, of course. So they want to automate things so they don't have to work for a living and then kill the man off. There you go. On the subject of reproduction, she wrote, we should produce only whole, complete beings, not physical defects or deficiencies, including emotional deficiencies such as maleness. She sold copies in leftist bookstores. This is why the left gets lambasted all the time. All you leftist guys, this is why the right, who are cowards, can't just come out and say the girls are doing this. They get a scapegoat like you losers who embraced feminism, who embraces people like Solanas, who says that you should be cut up. And on the streets of Greenwich Village for $1, $2 if the buyer was a man. Yes, the sales must have went well. The text distilled the anger and yearning that Solanas had exhibited throughout her life. In college, as a recently out lesbian, she rallied against the idea that educated women should define as housewives and mothers. How would they get their freebies, Solanas? That's why they ignored her. Even as she acknowledged that in the society ruled by men, which it isn't, that's false, such fates were probably inevitable. It's not probably, you see, these women want to get shacked up and married so they have a work slave. So this isn't ruled by men at all. This is men just being a bunch of slaves. Her ideas about gender and power calcified in the early 1960s, where she hitchhiked across the country and back again. She arrived in New York City in 1962 with the start of a play. She was writing several versions of the SCUM Manifesto. Good. Then, as now, Warhol was the most famous artist in America, and Solanas found her way onto the fringes of his social circle. She shared with him a copy of her play, Up Your Ass, in 1965 with the hope that he would produce it. Its central character is Bongi Perez, a bantering, panhandling prostitute who's frequently homeless, much like Solanas was herself. So notice Solanas hates men, but it didn't stop her from taking advantage of them by selling her body to them. It doesn't stop her from making money off them. Notice Solanas didn't want to get a real job, though. I think she was probably too mentally ill to get a job. So she she sold herself to men. Auditions and, oh, by the way, she couldn't sell herself to women, though, could she? Even though she was a lesbian. Women don't pay for sex. Auditions and rehearsals took place in the basement of Chelsea Hotel, the Bohemian enclave from which Solanas was evicted on several occasions. There you go. She couldn't pay her bills, and she was too mentally ill for people to deal with. Warhol found the manuscript objectionable. See, this is what I'm talking about, like the lack of self-respect of men in general. Objectionable. What he should have said, this is garbage and get out of my life. But of course, Warhol, like a typical guy, says, well, she's female, so she's harmless. So just ignore her. And eventually misplaced it, but he did cast her in his erotic film, I, a Man. Yeah, he just invited this. He was like one of these black guys who invited the KKK member into their home. And then he got shot, which goes to show just how brain dead most men are. Solanas then met with Maurice Garodius, hopefully I got his name right, the iconoclastic French publisher of Olympia's Press, who printed the first editions of Naked Lunch, The Story of O, and Lolita, about a deal for a new book. Wow. Story of O, Naked Lunch, those are famous titles. Over time, Solanas became convinced that Warhol and Garodius were conspiring to suppress, censor, and steal her voice. This is the thing, though. She might be, insane, but the insanity to me is much like drunkenness. It really shows how the average woman thinks. She has no way of suppressing how she feels. But the average woman grabs on to feminism and believes that their voices are being suppressed. She can come to terms with her stuff was just hateful and trash. Oh, by the way, she hates men, but she's coming to them. And she's attracted to these high status men. On the day in June when she walked into Warhol's studio, newly located in 33 Union Square West, Warhol wasn't there. Solanas left and returned several times until she spotted him on the sidewalk. Together, they rode the building's elevator up to the 6th floor. Ha ha. Soon there were gunshots. Warhol was taken to Columbus Hospital. Solanas' bullets had punctured his stomach, his liver, his spleen, and his esophagus and his lungs. So she shot him multiple times. At one time, the doctors pronounced him dead. He would live for 19 more years, wearing the surgical corset to support his abdomen. You know something? Warhol, the only way he deserved to get what he was is because, like I said, he knew what this woman was about. He knew she was unstable and vicious and hated him because it was a band. And yet he just invited her up because, she's a female. So therefore, she's harmless. She can't do anything to him. And he learned the hard way. Though I can't even say that he learned. Because you know something? Men knew this happened and men still think this way. So I don't know if men are capable of learning. That evening, Solanas turned herself into the officers of Times Squares. He had too much control over my life, she told the officer, referring to Warhol. Warhol had no control over her life. It's just more man blaming for the things she did. This is so standard. Valerie Solanas was born in 1936 in Ventnor City, New Jersey, just off the Atlantic City boardwalk. One of two girls and Lois Solanas, a bartender, Lewis, and Dorothy Biando, a dental assistant. Her parents separated when Valerie was 4 and divorced in 1947. Both remarried. Her father, she would later say, had sexually abused her from a young age. I doubt that because she was mentally ill and she hated guys. Still, she retained a correspondence with him for most of her life, of course. Because when this girl was running around getting kicked out of, evicted from places, she was probably calling up daddy for money. And this is another reason. That's when the bullshit comes through. Like, where's the proof that her father abused her? Nowhere. Valerie was by some accounts, a precocious child, but in middle school, she began to show signs of disobedience. Of course, puberty hit, skipping class, and even assaulting a teacher. By 15, she had given birth to 2 children, Linda, who was raised as her sister, and David, who she placed for adoption. She got rid of the guy. And I'm glad. I'm very glad for this boy. The last thing this male child needed was to be anywhere near this vicious psychopath. Linda, who was raised by her sister, at the time, it was not unusual for pregnancies to be concealed by such means. Her son David lucked out. Can you imagine what happened if today she would raise him and destroy him? If she was 15 today. In 1954, she enrolled in University of Maryland College Park, where she studied psychology. Wow, another soft science. Hey, I guess it must have been the patriarchy keeping her out of STEM. I'm just going to keep on harping about that. She then pursued a master's degree in psychology in University of Minnesota, but dropped out after 2 semesters because she said she felt that her ideas and research were not very likely to be funded as well as men's. No, People at the university just looked at her and said, "You're a psychopath, and we're not going to back your KKK ideas about men." That's what happened there. She spent the next decade putting her ideas on paper. She moved frequently as a result of eviction. Yes, she was a nutcase, and she was too vicious and violent to be around people, so they kept kicking her out. She wouldn't pay her bills, always with her typewriter in tow. In 66, her short story, The Young Girl's Primer, appeared in Cavalier, a Playboy-styled magazine that also published Ray Bradbury, Thomas Pynchon, and Stephen King. Wow. Stephen King and Ray Bradbury. You've got stories right next to Valerie Solanas. That must be quite an honor. The tale centers on a woman who sells sex. She's always selling sex, and conversation for the freedom to be creative. Yeah, in other words, she didn't want to work for a living. No one really does, but I mean, the next year she began selling mimeographed copies of SCUM around the city and seeking a producer for her play. The shooting in 68 brought national attention to her name and work. Yeah, because that was the only thing she did that was exciting in life. It wasn't worthwhile, but the story of the incidents was splashed across the front pages of papers like the Daily News in New York, the New York Times, which misspelled her name, Solanas. Copies of SCUM quickly sold out. This is quite a bee in her bonnet, that they misspelled her name, Solanas. Her attack on Warhol fractured mainstream feminist groups, including the organized National Organization for Women, whose members were split on whether to defend or condemn her. I'm going to give credit again to Analyzing Male Slavery, who's no longer active, who pointed out to me that what they were split on was that if they defended her, they were worried there'd be backlash. But of course, they found out there's no backlash, and so now they don't condemn her. They do all. That's why the SCUM Manifesto is still there to be read in universities. Those who defended her, including the writer T. Grace Atkinson and the lawyer Flo Kennedy, formed the bedrock of radical feminism and presented Solanas as a symbol of female rage. See, these are professional women, by the way, everyone. This is second wave feminists right here. This is the whole shebang. The ones that were condemning her were only going to condemn her in case there was backlash. The shooting became wrapped up in a larger narrative on gun violence when Senator Robert F. Kennedy was shot the next day. But notice, guys, when they speak of gun violence, who do they blame? Which gender do they blame? Solanas proved that gun violence is very neutral sexually. Gerardius published, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing his name wrong, published an edition of SCUM Manifesto after the shooting. Solanas had unwittingly sold him the rights of $500 previous year. Later editions were printed by AK Press and Verso. I doubt she unwittingly sold them. She's just saying that because it was a good idea at the time, actually. She made money off someone from trash. Her SCUM Manifesto is hateful trash. So, and this is again shows how pathetic men are. Gerardius shouldn't have given her a dime for that, but he's basically just giving her money to make her go away. So she did the right thing. Her SCUM Manifesto is out there and she got paid for it, but she didn't want to come off as the dummy she is. During her arraignment, Solanas was charged with attempted murder, assault, and possession of a dangerous weapon. She was deemed unable to stand trial as she was sent for psychiatric evaluation at Elmhurst Hospital in Queens, where she was received a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. I actually do agree with that. Her behavior is that of an insane person. The evaluators also noted her intelligence test scores, which placed her 98th percentile. I really don't believe that. There's nothing this woman ever did that came off as smart in any way. However, even though she was schizophrenic, you can't put that on all the second wave feminists who adopted her SCUM Manifesto and the average young woman who goes to university and reads it. So all you guys who say not all and don't generalize, where are all the women who are going to, protest this hate movement, this SCUM Manifesto on the university grounds and say, we are not for hate? Nowhere. Okay. On June 13th, Solanas was ruled insane by the Supreme Court of State of New York and spent months in psychiatric hospitals. When she was released in December, she shouldn't have been released because she wasn't cured and she's still a violent criminal. She began calling Warhol, there you go, Grotius and others in a group that she referred to as the mob with threatening messages. They led to her arrest in 1969. Thank God. These guys were lucky. These guys, Warhol and them were lucky. She just didn't get a gun and do it again. See, because she's a woman, the authorities handled her with kids' gloves. Solanas was held at the Women's House of Detention in Manhattan, then at Bellevue Hospital, before being sentenced to 3 years in prison. Good. She deserved that. After her release, she worked for a year and a half as an editor for the Majority Report. Shows you what the Majority Report is worth. The Women's Liberation Newsletter, a bi-weekly feminist publication, and began writing a book, her name as the title. She spent her final years destitute in Phoenix and living in welfare hotels in San Francisco. She did this to herself. She was too mentally ill and violent and vicious to be taken care of. Because if she wasn't, a woman has to burn all her bridges before society rejects her. And it just goes again, knowing her, what she's done, and knowing her history. The Majority Report, the newsletter, it allowed her to write for them. So it shows you what the average person thinks about the average guy in the street. Toward the end of 1987, the factory superstar, better known as Ultraviolet, called Solanas to talk about Warhol, who died in February. That's in 1987. There you go. Warhol lived a decently long life, but I'm sure it was cut short because of his injuries. And they're actually talking to this woman. I keep thinking that it is what a shame it is that she's mad, utterly mad. And Ultraviolet wrote in her 1988 memoir, yeah, I mean, it'd be great if she was not crazy. It would have been great that Andy Warhol got shot for being an innocent man. Famous for 15 minutes, my years with Andy Warhol. For in the beginning, beyond her overheated rhetoric, it's not overheated, more weasel language, it's hateful rhetoric. She had a truly revolutionary vision of a better world run by and for the benefit of women. Yeah, see, the better world would be if we all died. All of us cotton pickers died. So that's what feminism thinks of men, and feminism is adopted by women. So all you guys who don't like me generalizing, go screw yourself. On April 25th, 1988, Solanas was found dead in her rooms at the Bristol Hotel in the gritty Tenderloin neighborhood of San Francisco. She was 52. The police report, which also misspelled her name. See what I mean? She really gets ticked off about them misspelling her name. I'm glad they did, because it shows you what a nobody she was. described the room as clean with papers neatly stacked on the desk. Solanas was kneeling next to the bed covered in maggots and apparently been dead for 5 days. The decided cause was pneumonia. She was dead for 5 days because nobody dealt with this woman. She was too ill she chased everybody away. I don't feel sorry for her in this way. 1996, her story was theatrically depicted in Mary Herron's film, I Shall War Andy Warhol. Lily Taylor was widely praised for a leading role. I actually saw this film and really liked it. And Lily Taylor, she's a great actress. And it's just on the side note, it's too bad you didn't see much of her after that, you know. Solanas inspired fictional works, including an episode of American Horror Story, Cult, which she played by Lena Dunham, no kidding, in a 2019 novel by Swedish author Sarah Stridsberg. Valerie, which won the Nordic Council Literature Prize and was longlisted for a Man Booker Prize. By Stridsberg's account, Solanas was not erratic, but measured, not murderous, but tender, not insane, but idealistic, even admirably so. Yeah, you see that, guys? You hear all that, guys? It's idealistic, this world where we all get murdered. But it was with the 2014 biography of Valerie Solanas, The Defiant Life of a Woman Who Wrote Scum and Shot Andy Warhol, that a fuller picture of her life came to light. Yes, she's defiant. Just like the KKK is defiant to all those Black people living down the street. In it, the author, Brianne Falls, don't care if I get her name right, writes about an exchange between Solanas and her friend Jeremiah Newton. Her friend Jeremiah? Guy. Newton asked Solanas if her manifesto was to be taken literally. I don't want to kill all men, she replied, but using an expletive, she added, I think males should be neutered and castrated so they can't mess up any more women's lives. See, she doesn't kill us all, just want us neutered and castrated. God. And there you go. And this is what the average woman seems to think about the average man, because let's face it, there's never, ever been a pushback against this monster, ever. People either embrace her or at best they just hold their heads down and keep going and ignore the problem. Because this is a very vicious problem. No one wants to admit how the average guy in the street is seen. And this is, high status, universities still have this manifesto saying, here, read this KKK, all you cotton pickers, know your place. Society should be ashamed if it was capable of it. Anyway, goodbye.